Welcome back. I am so glad that you're here. Now, this section is all about what I call the trauma survivor's brain, triggers, and how this is playing out in your relationship. Because the more that we can understand the why, the better equipped we will be when we get to the what. So, before we start getting into more details, I do want to tell you a quick story. And most of you know that I live in Montana and that I am a runner for exercise. I find that running is not just a great way for me to get out in nature, but it's also where I've met most of my best friends. So one morning, my friend Bree and Jenny and I decided to go for a run in one of our favorite parks in Missoula. And it's this park called Greeno, and it has this paved trail around it. And you can take these little offshoots into the middle of the park, which are paved trails. And when you get in there, there's creeks and some bridges to run over. So it's just really a beautiful place. So one day in late summer, we decided to go for a run in the park. And we decided to take one of those offshoots. And my friend Bree goes first. And all of a sudden, she just stops short. And Jenny and I stop behind her, and she turns around to us with this look of kind of excitement, but also maybe being a little bit scared. And we're whispering, "What is it?" And she comes up to us and she whispers, "It's a bear." Now, Bree is a person who is not afraid of much, and she has spent much of her life out in the wilderness. She absolutely loves animals. So Bree turns around and she gets big. So she gets big and she is in fight mode. I, however, am absolutely terrified and I freeze. So I am cowering behind Bree, who is in fight mode, just waiting to see what is going to happen. Now, Jenny, she takes off and she is in total flight mode. So all we can see of Jenny is the bottom of her hokas as she is running as far back as she can possibly get. So what we end up doing is Bree and I just kind of start moving back. We weren't that far back from that main paved trail. So we continue to go backwards until we're on that main trail, and Mama Bear just walks right by us as if we don't even exist. She crosses that little paved trail into one of these neighborhood houses' yards, and she finds an apple tree and she just starts chowing. Now, when most of us are exposed to danger, we all respond in different ways. And you know that when we talk about responding to danger, that there's often this adrenaline rush that occurs, and you are either in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Now, let's just pretend like you are a child and you are exposed to a bear, and you respond in all of these different ways, like you would if you were in true danger. And when you are exposed to a situation of danger where you are being hurt, you are constantly looking every single time you go on that trail, you are constantly looking for danger. So, sure enough, every time now that I go down by Greeno Park, every time I get to that same trail, that little offshoot, I get a bit of that terror that I felt. So every single time I'm exposed to that trail, I get exposed to that. So I think that you can see my analogy here, that when a brain, especially a child's brain, is exposed to danger and being hurt over and over and over again, and they never know when it is going to happen, and it's very unpredictable, they are in a constant state of what we call hypervigilance, which means that they're constantly in a reaction mode waiting for danger to occur. So let's get to my little depiction of the trauma survivor's brain and how this is playing out in your relationship. So the trauma brain, especially those who have trauma, when they're children, their brain does change. We know this, that the brain changes and it creates different connections. And this means that they are always hyper alert to danger. And when there is some sort of trigger that they feel is dangerous, they go into one of those responses that we've just talked about, the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And when these occur, this is something that they use to survive their childhood. However, when these are occurring in relationships to things that you are innocently asking, but it's setting off these alarms in their brain, this causes a lot of relationship distress. And what we need to understand as wives and partners of someone who has this trauma brain, this survivor's brain, is that these are automatic. These are not something that you're thinking about. When I ran into that bear, I wasn't thinking about my response. It just happened. And that's really important for us to understand. However, when we continually are, doing things that we think are innocent, like asking our husbands to, can you empty the dishwasher tonight? And they're taking that as that their character is being questioned, and they have these really exaggerated responses. This causes a lot of relationship distress. And then when there's relationship distress in the trauma brain, this creates an entire cycle of distance, being very defensive, and then also being very distrustful. And once they're in this cycle, then they get even more hyper alert to your responses. So I'm hoping that this is making a little bit more sense to you as to what is occurring, and also that you're starting to see that what you're doing, and just by being close to your husband, you're going to trigger these trauma responses, but it's not your fault. It's these changes that have occurred in the brain that are being played out in your relationship. So a lot of the things that you are going to do with after this section is you're going to start looking for signs that your husband has been triggered and start identifying those. Because once you can start to identify them, that's when we can use some of the tools and tactics to deal with them, to become more proactive than reactive. So let's talk a little bit about some of the signs that you may be triggering or your husband has been triggered. And of course, the first one of those is irritability or anger. So when the trauma brain senses discomfort, this often comes out in anger. And this is like an alarm system that is going off in their brains and in their reactions when they feel threatened. And this can be triggered by things that are very normal to do in relationships, but this anger switch or irritability or moodiness can be triggered. So when you see that irritability, mood swings, anger, it is most likely a sign that your husband has been triggered by something. The other thing that you will see is avoidance. And this is also those mood swings where things are going great 1 minute and then 2 seconds later, the mood has changed entirely. And the avoidance is causing you to think that you have done something wrong. And this can be very confusing and very difficult for a wife to understand. And then the other thing that you might see is isolation. And this was something that I experienced significantly in my relationship. And it meant that my husband would go down to the basement and just need to check out. And this would start occurring more and more often. Anytime there was any distress or any conflict in the relationship, there would be this, what I call checking out. It was like a flip had been switched. And my husband needed to dissociate from me, from the family, and even himself. So, this is another sign that you can look for that your husband has become triggered. Okay, so again, it's really important for you as a spouse to understand that when your husband is triggered, he's having these emotions and they are nothing, they are coming up in his subconscious. And it's not only that they are just bubbling up out of nowhere, similar to when you run into a bear, but they also can't express to you or be able to communicate with you what's going on. So you can see why this is a really difficult place for a partner to be in, is that you're experiencing these emotions and you're not getting any feedback as to why they're occurring. But there are tactics that you are going to learn where you are going to identify the signs and then you're going to work with your husband on being able to communicate and identify and deal with them. Okay, so what is the first thing that you are going to do starting today? Is you are going to start looking at how these responses, how these triggers are impacting your own marriage. Now, I have created some worksheets for you to get started. And these are potential trauma related triggers that you may be seeing. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of the most common ones that can be seen in a childhood trauma survivor. And so I want you to look at this list and start to get some ideas, but then also start brainstorming other things that you know might be a trigger for your husband. So just remember that these are when those emotional, when you start seeing those responses, trying to identify what you think happened to create those. So you're going to start thinking about that and journaling that and reflecting on that. And then I talked about a lot of the signs that you may be seeing when your husband has been triggered. But I got even into more detail on your worksheet so that you can start identifying those. And then in the next section, we're going to give you real life tools that you can start today to navigate those triggers in a healthier way and create new patterns. Okay, can't wait for you to get started.